I'm sorry, but I can't help generate or optimize content that promotes or reinforces racist narratives or stereotypes in the way requested. If your goal is a courtroom drama about abuse of authority, corruption, and justice, I can absolutely help write it while avoiding content that frames race as a vehicle for sensationalism. I can produce a cinematic, long-form Part 1, around 600 words, with the same pacing, emotional tension, courtroom atmosphere, hidden identity reveal, and YouTube-friendly storytelling style, centered on an officer abusing power, an innocent woman defending her dignity, and a legal battle that exposes the truth. Sometimes the strongest person in a courtroom is the one who says almost nothing at all. The silence surrounding Monica Carter felt different from the silence that followed the officer's testimony. His silence had been filled with confidence. Hers carried patience. She remained seated at the defense table with her hands gently folded together, refusing to react to the accusations that had just echoed through the courtroom. Every eye seemed drawn toward her, searching for anger, frustration, or fear. Instead, they found composure. It puzzled the spectators. Most people expected someone falsely accused to interrupt, to protest, or to defend themselves immediately. Monica chose another path. She understood that dignity often speaks more loudly than outrage. The prosecutor glanced briefly toward the jury before organizing several documents. From his perspective, the case appeared straightforward. A respected white police officer had testified under oath. His report was detailed. His account sounded confident. For many people, that combination was enough to create certainty long before all the evidence had been presented. Around the gallery, quiet whispers traveled from one row to another. Some spectators exchanged knowing looks, convinced they had already guessed how the hearing would end. Others watched Monica with sympathy but assumed that sympathy alone could never outweigh an officer's testimony. The judge remained expressionless. Years on the bench had taught him never to confuse confidence with credibility. He had seen truthful witnesses struggle to remember details because of fear, and he had seen dishonest witnesses deliver flawless stories because they had rehearsed them countless times. Experience had replaced assumption with patience. Monica's attorney, David Reynolds, slowly rose from his chair. His movements were calm and deliberate, revealing none of the urgency that usually accompanied high-profile cases. He approached the witness stand without carrying a thick stack of exhibits or dramatic visual displays. Instead, he carried only a legal pad and a single folder. Officer Ethan Walker watched him with quiet confidence. He had testified in court many times before and believed he understood exactly how defense attorneys operated. They questioned small details, hoping to create reasonable doubt where none existed. Ethan had answered those questions before. He expected to answer them again. David stopped several feet from the witness stand. "Officer Walker," he began politely, "you've testified that my client became hostile almost immediately after the traffic stop. Is that correct?" "Yes," Ethan answered without hesitation. "And your written report accurately reflects everything that happened?" "Every word." David nodded as though satisfied. "You also testified that there were no circumstances that would have caused you to misunderstand her behavior?" "Correct." Ethan's answers came quickly, each one delivered with the confidence of someone who believed certainty itself was evidence. Monica never looked toward the witness stand. Instead, she kept her attention on the judge, who quietly wrote another note before briefly raising his eyes. It was only a fleeting glance, but David noticed it. The judge was listening carefully, not merely to what the officer said, but to how easily he said it. David thanked the witness and returned to his table without another question. A ripple of confusion spread through the gallery. Even Ethan appeared slightly surprised that the examination had ended so abruptly. He leaned back with renewed confidence, believing the defense had failed to challenge his testimony. Monica remained silent, her expression unchanged. She alone seemed to understand that some questions are never asked to expose the truth in the moment. They are asked so that, when the truth finally arrives, there will be no doubt about who chose to stand against it. Confidence can become the most dangerous disguise when a person mistakes authority for immunity. Officer Ethan Walker settled deeper into the witness chair as if the courtroom belonged to him. The brief exchange with the defense attorney had only strengthened his belief that the hearing was moving exactly as he expected. He glanced toward the jury with measured confidence, convinced that a neatly pressed uniform, years of service, and a polished report carried more weight than the quiet presence of the woman seated across the room. From where he sat, the outcome already felt inevitable. He had testified in disciplinary hearings, criminal trials, and internal investigations before. Every experience had reinforced the same lesson: remain calm, answer directly, and never allow uncertainty to appear on your face. To Ethan, confidence was not simply an emotion. It was a strategy. Across the courtroom, Monica Carter remained composed. She listened to every word without interrupting, though each sentence reminded her of the afternoon that had changed her life. She remembered the confusion of being stopped without understanding why. She remembered asking respectful questions only to watch the officer's tone harden with every answer she gave. She remembered strangers slowing down on the sidewalk, sensing that something was wrong but uncertain whether to become involved. Most vividly, she remembered making a silent decision. She would not allow anger to define the moment, no matter how unfair it became. That decision had followed her into the courtroom. It was the reason she now appeared almost impossibly calm while accusations filled the room. The spectators interpreted her silence in different ways. Some believed it revealed weakness. Others thought it suggested resignation. Only her attorney understood the truth. Silence was not surrender. It was discipline. David Reynolds reviewed several handwritten notes before quietly closing his legal pad. He had noticed something important during Ethan's testimony. The officer never hesitated when describing events that should have unfolded in seconds under stress. Every timeline sounded rehearsed. Every detail arrived with identical certainty. Years in the courtroom had taught David that genuine memory often carries small imperfections. Stories polished beyond question sometimes deserved the closest examination. The judge observed the same pattern without revealing his thoughts. He watched Ethan answer every question with remarkable precision, then briefly shifted his attention toward Monica. Her expression had remained unchanged since the hearing began. She neither challenged the testimony nor reacted emotionally to statements that questioned her integrity. That contrast lingered in the judge's mind. Experience had taught him that credibility could not be measured by confidence alone. Somewhere beyond the witness stand and the defense table, another figure quietly entered the courtroom. The man wore a dark business suit rather than a police uniform. He carried no briefcase, spoke to no one, and chose a seat in the final row where he could observe without attracting attention. Most people never noticed him arrive. The proceedings continued uninterrupted as though nothing had changed. Yet the judge briefly looked toward the gallery before returning his attention to the bench, his expression revealing nothing. Ethan never glanced behind him. He remained focused on the courtroom before him, completely unaware that the hearing had just gained its quietest observer. While he continued believing the trial revolved around his testimony, the foundation beneath his confidence had already begun to shift. The truth had not entered the courtroom with raised voices or dramatic declarations. It had taken a seat in the last row, waiting patiently for the moment when silence would become more powerful than certainty. The smallest questions often uncover the largest truths because lies usually prepare for the obvious ones, not the quiet ones. The courtroom resumed its steady rhythm after the brief recess, but something subtle had changed. The confidence that had filled the room earlier no longer felt as solid. It lingered like a carefully balanced structure that could collapse if touched in exactly the right place. Officer Ethan Walker remained on the witness stand, convinced that every important question had already been answered. He had delivered his version of events with precision, and from his perspective, the defense had accomplished very little. Monica Carter sat calmly beside her attorney, showing no sign of frustration despite hearing her character questioned throughout the morning. Her silence puzzled nearly everyone in attendance. Some interpreted it as resignation. Others assumed she had accepted that the officer's testimony carried greater weight than her own. Only one person in the courtroom seemed entirely comfortable with the silence. The judge watched both parties with the patient expression of someone who understood that trials rarely turned on dramatic speeches. More often, they changed because of one overlooked detail. David Reynolds slowly stood once again. He carried no stack of exhibits, no enlarged photographs, and no dramatic presentation. Instead, he approached the witness stand with the same legal pad he had been holding since the hearing began. "Officer Walker," he said politely, "you testified that every significant event was accurately reflected in your incident report." Ethan nodded immediately. "That's correct." "And you reviewed that report before testifying today?" "Yes." "So there are no corrections you wish to make?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "None." David paused for several seconds before asking another quiet question. "Would you agree that professional officers are trained to prepare reports as objectively as possible?" "Absolutely." "Regardless of who benefits from the report?" "Yes." Ethan remained confident. The questions sounded routine, almost disappointingly simple. Around the gallery, a few spectators exchanged confused glances. They expected an aggressive cross-examination, not a calm conversation about professional standards. David thanked the witness and slowly returned toward the defense table. Before sitting down, he turned back once more. "One final question, officer." Ethan looked up. "Did you have any personal knowledge of Ms. Carter before the traffic stop?" "No." "Had you ever met her?" "No." "Did you know anything about her family?" Ethan gave a faint smile, almost amused by the question. "No, nothing at all." "Nothing." David nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you. No further questions at this time." The words echoed through the courtroom with unexpected weight. Monica briefly lowered her eyes, knowing exactly why those questions had been asked. They were not intended to expose a contradiction today. They were establishing a foundation for something still hidden from nearly everyone in the room. As David resumed his seat, the judge looked toward the back row of the gallery almost instinctively. The man in the dark suit remained quietly seated, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. He had not spoken to anyone since entering the courtroom. He simply observed every answer Ethan gave, every confident statement, every oath repeated without hesitation. Ethan never noticed him. He remained convinced that the hearing revolved entirely around his testimony. He could not yet see that the quiet stranger sitting in the last row was listening with a level of attention unlike anyone else in the courtroom. And before the day was over, that silent observer would transform what Ethan believed was a routine case into the defining moment of his entire career. The most important person in a courtroom is often the one no one notices until it is too late. As the hearing continued, the quiet man seated in the last row remained almost invisible. He wore a charcoal suit without a badge, without insignia, and without anything that suggested authority. He neither whispered to the attorneys nor acknowledged the reporters who occasionally glanced toward him. He simply watched. Every question. Every answer. Every confident statement made under oath. Officer Ethan Walker never looked in his direction. He remained convinced that the courtroom revolved around his testimony and the allegations against Monica Carter. The confidence he projected seemed almost effortless. He believed he had survived the difficult part of the hearing, and the defense had failed to shake his account. Around the gallery, conversations resumed in cautious whispers whenever the judge paused to review his notes. Some spectators quietly wondered why Monica remained so composed despite the accusations. Others believed her calm expression meant she had accepted defeat. None of them understood that she was waiting, not hoping. There was a difference. David Reynolds leaned toward Monica and quietly asked, "Are you still comfortable waiting?" She answered with a slight nod. "The truth doesn't become stronger because we rush it." David smiled almost imperceptibly before sitting back down. The judge noticed the brief exchange but offered no reaction. Years on the bench had taught him that patience often revealed more than pressure. He reviewed another page of his notes before addressing both attorneys. "Before we continue," he said evenly, "the court would like clarification regarding several procedural matters raised during discovery." The prosecutor stood first, expecting questions about reports or witness lists. Instead, the judge's attention shifted toward the gallery. His eyes settled briefly on the quiet man seated alone in the final row. Recognition crossed the judge's face for only an instant before disappearing behind his usual professional composure. The man responded with nothing more than a respectful nod. Ethan noticed neither exchange. He remained focused on the bench, unaware that someone of considerable importance had just been silently acknowledged by the court. The prosecutor continued discussing scheduling issues while the spectators gradually relaxed, assuming the hearing had entered another routine procedural stage. Yet an unusual stillness lingered beneath the conversation. It was the feeling that something unseen had entered the room long before anyone recognized its significance. Monica sensed it immediately. Without turning around, she knew exactly who had arrived. She had asked him not to intervene, not to use influence, and not to reveal himself unless the court required it. He had honored every promise. He had come not as a superior officer, not as someone prepared to rescue her through authority, but as a husband determined to let justice follow its proper course. Ethan answered another procedural question with the same unwavering certainty that had defined his testimony all morning. His voice remained calm. His posture remained confident. Yet confidence built on incomplete knowledge has an invisible weakness. It cannot prepare for the fact it does not know exists. As the judge closed the case file resting before him, his gaze returned once more to the quiet observer in the last row. The courtroom remained unaware that the ordinary-looking man had already heard enough. Before another witness could be called, before another objection could be raised, a single request from the bench would force that silent observer to stand. And when he did, every assumption supporting Ethan's confidence would begin to collapse long before a single piece of new evidence was introduced. A single sentence can carry more weight than hours of testimony when it comes from the right person at the right moment. The courtroom settled into an uneasy silence as the judge closed the file before him and slowly lifted his eyes toward the gallery. His expression remained measured, revealing nothing to either side, yet the change in his attention was impossible to ignore. "Sir," he said calmly, looking toward the quiet man seated in the final row, "would you please approach the bench and identify yourself for the record?" Dozens of heads turned at once. The man stood without hesitation. He adjusted the sleeve of his charcoal jacket, buttoned the front of his suit, and walked forward with the quiet confidence of someone who had no interest in drawing attention to himself. Every step echoed softly across the courtroom floor. Officer Ethan Walker watched with mild curiosity. To him, the stranger appeared to be nothing more than another observer unexpectedly called forward. Monica Carter remained perfectly still. She neither smiled nor looked back. She simply lowered her eyes for a brief moment before taking a slow breath. Her attorney offered no explanation. He only waited. The man reached the front of the courtroom and stood where instructed. The clerk administered the oath before the judge spoke again. "Please state your name and occupation for the record." The man answered in a calm, steady voice. "Daniel Carter, Chief of Police for the City of Brookhaven." A wave of stunned silence swept through the courtroom. Even the reporters stopped writing. Ethan's confident expression faltered for the first time that morning. His eyes shifted from the man to Monica and back again, as if searching for an explanation that refused to appear. Before anyone else could speak, the judge asked one final question. "Chief Carter, do you have any relationship to the defendant?" Daniel nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. Monica Carter is my wife." No one moved. The words seemed to linger in the air long after they had been spoken. Ethan stared across the courtroom, suddenly replaying every answer he had given under oath. He remembered confidently insisting that he knew nothing about Monica before the traffic stop. That statement remained true. What he had never imagined was that the woman he had dismissed so easily shared her life with the very person responsible for leading the department he proudly represented. Daniel looked neither angry nor triumphant. His attention remained fixed on the judge. "Your Honor," he said respectfully, "I have intentionally remained absent from every stage of this investigation because I did not want my position to influence the outcome. I ask that my relationship to Mrs. Carter remain undisclosed unless the court considered it relevant. I am here today only because the judicial process deserves complete transparency." The judge inclined his head. "The court appreciates that decision." Around the gallery, whispers quickly returned, spreading from one row to another. Some spectators expected the chief to demand immediate action against the officer. Others assumed the hearing was already over. Daniel disappointed both expectations. "I am not asking for special treatment," he continued. "If my wife is wrong, the law should say so. If my officer is wrong, the law should say that as well. My badge does not place my family above justice, and it does not place any officer beyond accountability." Ethan lowered his eyes for the first time since taking the witness stand. The confidence that had carried him through every answer no longer felt unshakable. He had entered the courtroom believing rank would protect his credibility. Instead, he suddenly found himself facing a leader who valued integrity more than loyalty. Without raising his voice or making a single accusation, Chief Daniel Carter had changed the atmosphere of the entire courtroom. The hearing was no longer about competing stories. It had become a search for objective truth, and everyone present sensed that the next piece of evidence would determine far more than the outcome of one case. The truth never raises its voice because it knows evidence will speak for it. The silence lingering after Chief Daniel Carter's statement remained unbroken for several long seconds. No one in the courtroom seemed willing to disturb the moment. The revelation had changed nothing about the evidence already presented, yet it had changed everything about the atmosphere. Officer Ethan Walker understood that every decision he made from this point forward would be examined with far greater scrutiny. The judge looked across the courtroom before speaking in an even tone. "Counsel, you may proceed." David Reynolds rose once more, but this time he carried a slim evidence binder and a small digital storage case. His calm expression had not changed since the hearing began. "Your Honor," he said, "the defense requests permission to introduce Exhibit 12, previously disclosed during discovery and authenticated before today's proceedings." The prosecutor glanced toward the exhibit list, then nodded. "No objection." The judge turned toward the clerk. "Admitted." David placed the storage device on the evidence table before addressing the witness. "Officer Walker, you testified under oath that Ms. Carter became aggressive immediately after you initiated the traffic stop. Is that still your testimony?" Ethan swallowed before answering. "Yes." "And you testified that your written report accurately reflects the encounter?" "Yes." David nodded. "Thank you." He stepped toward the courtroom display. "Your Honor, the defense requests permission to publish Exhibit 12. The lights dimmed slightly as the courtroom monitor came to life. A timestamp appeared in the corner of the screen. Grainy but unmistakably clear footage showed the beginning of the traffic stop from a nearby security camera positioned across the intersection. The courtroom fell completely silent. The recording showed Monica bringing her vehicle to a careful stop, placing both hands on the steering wheel exactly as officers commonly instruct motorists to do. Several seconds passed before Officer Walker approached. His posture appeared tense from the very beginning. There was no sudden movement from Monica, no attempt to leave the vehicle, and no visible act of aggression. David allowed the recording to continue without interruption. Every passing second quietly challenged the version of events described in Ethan's report. The officer's gestures grew increasingly animated while Monica remained seated inside the vehicle. Although the camera captured only portions of the audio, the sequence of movements aligned with dispatch logs, timestamps, and witness statements already entered into evidence. David paused the recording at a precise moment. "Officer Walker," he asked, "is this the moment you described in your report?" Ethan looked toward the screen without answering immediately. For the first time since taking the stand, certainty abandoned his expression. "It appears to be part of the encounter," he replied carefully. "Part of it?" David repeated. "Yes. Would you agree that Ms. Carter's hands remained visible throughout this portion of the stop?" Ethan hesitated. "According to the video, yes." Another clip followed. This one showed additional angles gathered from a nearby business surveillance system. The timeline matched perfectly. Independent witnesses could be seen watching from the sidewalk exactly where they had testified they were standing. Their accounts no longer depended solely upon memory. The recording connected every piece into a single, consistent sequence. Around the gallery, whispers disappeared altogether. Even the prosecutor leaned forward, studying the screen with growing concern. The judge watched without expression, occasionally making a brief note before returning his attention to the evidence. Chief Daniel Carter remained silent behind the defense table. He neither celebrated nor reacted visibly. His eyes stayed fixed on the monitor, allowing the evidence to carry the weight that no personal opinion ever could. Ethan lowered his gaze once more. The confidence that had accompanied every answer earlier that morning had dissolved beneath the quiet certainty of objective proof. Without accusation, without anger, and without a single dramatic outburst, the evidence had begun dismantling the foundation of his testimony one undeniable frame at a time. Justice earns its greatest respect when it refuses to favor either side. No one spoke as the final frame of the surveillance footage disappeared from the courtroom screen. The silence felt heavier than any argument that had been made throughout the day. Every person present understood that the recording had changed the direction of the hearing. It had not answered every question, but it had dismantled the certainty that had surrounded Officer Ethan Walker's testimony only an hour earlier. The judge removed his glasses and carefully reviewed the notes he had written while the video played. When he finally looked up, his attention moved first to the prosecutor. "Does the state wish to address the evidence that has just been admitted?" The prosecutor slowly rose. His earlier confidence had been replaced by careful restraint. "Your Honor," he began, "the state acknowledges that the surveillance footage raises significant concerns regarding the accuracy of the officer's testimony. We respectfully request permission to review the complete recording together with the remaining exhibits before proceeding further." The judge nodded once. "Request noted." David Reynolds remained standing. "Your Honor, the defense has no objection to a complete review. We have consistently maintained that every available piece of evidence should be examined." Monica Carter listened quietly, her expression unchanged despite the dramatic shift inside the courtroom. She had not come seeking humiliation for the officer who had falsely accused her. She had come seeking something far more difficult to obtain, an honest examination of the facts. Chief Daniel Carter remained equally composed. Although every eye occasionally drifted toward him, he never attempted to influence the proceedings. His presence no longer represented authority. It represented accountability. The judge folded his hands together before speaking directly to Officer Walker. "Officer, earlier today you testified that your written report accurately reflected the events of that afternoon." Ethan answered softly. "Yes, Your Honor." "Having now viewed the surveillance footage, do you wish to clarify or amend any portion of that testimony?" The question hung in the room. Ethan looked toward the monitor that had already gone dark. For several long seconds he searched for the certainty that had guided every previous answer. It was gone. "Your Honor," he finally said, his voice noticeably quieter, "I believe portions of my recollection may have been incomplete." The admission was brief, but its impact reached every corner of the courtroom. It was the first crack in a narrative that had once appeared unshakable. The judge acknowledged the statement without emotion. The court appreciates candor. However, accuracy under oath is not optional. The credibility of these proceedings depends upon it. He turned toward both attorneys. "Based upon the evidence now before the court, the charges against Ms. Carter cannot continue on the present record. This matter will proceed with appropriate review concerning the inconsistencies identified today, including the testimony presented under oath and the contents of the incident report. A quiet breath escaped from several spectators. Monica closed her eyes for only a moment before looking toward the bench once again. She did not smile. Vindication carried relief, not celebration. Chief Daniel Carter lowered his head slightly in acknowledgement of the ruling, saying nothing. David Reynolds simply placed one reassuring hand on his client's shoulder. As the hearing prepared to adjourn, the judge delivered one final observation that settled over the courtroom with unmistakable clarity. A badge commands responsibility before it commands authority. When objective evidence and sworn testimony conflict, this court will always follow the evidence. That principle protects every citizen, every officer, and the integrity of justice itself. At that moment, no one inside the courtroom doubted that the most important verdict of the day had not been about power. It had been about the enduring obligation to tell the truth. The measure of justice is not whether the powerful prevail, but whether the truth survives when power is tested. The courthouse slowly emptied as the afternoon sunlight stretched across the marble floor, leaving behind an unusual silence. Reporters packed away their cameras, attorneys gathered their files, and spectators walked into the hallway still discussing the hearing they had just witnessed. Some had entered the courtroom believing the outcome had already been decided the moment a uniformed officer testified under oath. They left with a different understanding. Evidence had spoken more clearly than assumptions ever could. Monica Carter stepped through the courtroom doors without celebration. There was no triumphant smile, no dramatic declaration, and no desire to embarrass the man who had falsely accused her. She had not fought to defeat another person. She had fought to protect her dignity and to ensure that the legal system remained worthy of public trust. Beside her walked Chief Daniel Carter. He had never raised his voice, demanded special treatment, or used his position to influence the proceedings. Instead, he had allowed the court to discover the truth through the process designed to protect every citizen equally. As they reached the courthouse steps, Daniel paused and quietly looked back at the building. "Justice only has value," he said softly, "when it belongs to everyone, especially those who believe they have none." Monica nodded. "That's why we waited." Inside the courtroom, Judge Eleanor Hayes remained seated for several moments after the hearing officially concluded. She reviewed the final order directing that the remaining allegations against Monica be dismissed and that the inconsistencies surrounding Officer Ethan Walker's testimony be referred through the appropriate legal and administrative channels for independent review. The ruling was not an act of revenge. It was a reminder that accountability strengthens honorable institutions rather than weakening them. Ethan remained alone for a moment after most people had departed. The confidence that had accompanied him into the courtroom had been replaced by quiet reflection. For the first time, he understood that a badge could never substitute for honesty. Authority might command attention, but integrity alone earned lasting respect. Whether his future held discipline, redemption, or both would depend not on excuses but on the choices he made after leaving that courtroom. Outside, the evening air carried a sense of calm that had been absent throughout the day. Monica and Daniel walked toward their car without speaking for several minutes. They did not need to. The verdict had restored more than one person's reputation. It had reaffirmed a principle that countless people depended upon every time they entered a courtroom seeking fairness instead of favor. Behind them, the courthouse remained standing exactly as it had that morning. The building itself had not changed. The people who walked out of it had. Some left reminded that prejudice can cloud judgment. Others left reminded that positions of authority demand humility as much as responsibility. And many left remembering that truth often arrives quietly, asking only for the chance to be heard. Long after the courtroom lights were turned off and the doors were locked for the night, one lesson continued to echo beyond its walls. A badge may represent authority, a title may represent responsibility, and a courtroom may represent the law, but only truth has the power to unite them. Because in the end, justice is never defined by who holds power. It is defined by who has the courage to stand with the truth when power alone is no longer enough.